Although the term serial killer wasn't popularized until the 1970s by FBI agent Robert K. Ressler, they were still around before that. It's generally accepted that he invented the term, but we know that isn't true because in 1947 a book uses the term, or an extremely similar one. Despite all of this, serial killers have existed as long as humans have existed. In fact, it's popularly believed that the first serial killer was H.H. Holmes, who was active in the 1800s. However, even in the 1500s, there were those who killed a mass amount of people, such as Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory. The history of serial killers has gone back as far as history itself, and for this very special series, I'm going to be exploring the past 100 years of serial killers. What's up guys, it's Freaky Informer, and this super special series is to thank you for 100 subscribers. When I started my channel in February, I didn't think I would get this far, and I'm going to continue making videos for fun as I always have. If you'd like to subscribe, go for it. This episode is part 1 of exploring 100 years of serial killers from 1921 to 1926. I will be discussing their victim count, modus operandi, how they were caught, if they were caught, and the sentences that they were given. So let's get into it. Representing 1921, we have Harold Jones, a Welsh-born shop assistant who targeted young girls. I chose him to represent this year because he was apprehended on the 14th of November 1921. Both crimes also took place in this year. The then 16-year-old had already been on trial in June of 1921 for the murder and sexual assault of 8-year-old Frida Bernal. He was acquitted of the crimes, and so he went on to target 11-year-old Florence Little 17 days after this acquittal. Jones initially targeted the girls in order to abuse them sexually, but quickly realized that they would tell the authorities of his abduction. At least with his first victim, that was his thought process. Jones's method of murder included asphyxiation and extremely violent blunt force trauma to the head. He disposed of Bernal by throwing her tiny body into a burlap sack and putting her in the alleyway adjacent to the store he worked at. He was ultimately cleared of this murder because he claimed to have only served her in the store at 9 a.m. that day, and his employer provided him with a false alibi. However, in the second trial, Jones outright admitted to the first murder, as well as the police at the time finding the murder weapon and trapdoor of Little's final resting place stained with blood. However, it was Jones's own father going into the attic and finding the little girl's body that prompted the catching of the child murderer. His father performed a citizen's arrest and Jones was punished. Unfortunately, he escaped capital punishment due to being underage. He served 20 years of a lifetime sentence and was released at the age of 35. From then on, he took on a new alias and moved to London. It is popularly believed that Harold Jones is behind the Hammersmith nude murders in 1964 and 1965, but no evidence was ever linked to him. He died on January 2nd of 1971 from bone cancer, with a wife and daughter learning after his death that he was a child rapist and murderer. In 1922, Henri Désiré Landru was executed by guillotine, permanently ending his reign of terror. Landru's crimes spanned from January of 1915 to January of 1919. He established a pattern of seducing and murdering women, with his overall victim count coming to 11 women from the ages of 19 to 55. He also murdered a 16-year-old boy named André Couchet. Landru's main motivation for the murders he committed was for financial gain, as well as ridding himself of women he no longer wanted to seduce. Some evidence points to the method of murder being asphyxia, however it's difficult to know for sure as there are many conflicting reports. The sister of one of Landru's victims, Célestine Buisson, reported that she had not seen Célestine in some time. However, because police did not attempt to find Célestine, her sister took it upon herself to track down the man. She knew where he lived, as well as what he looked like, and so was able to convince police to go to the murderer's home and arrest him. After searching Landru's home, documentation linking him to the 11 women was found, and slowly they were able to build a case. Landru was convicted of 11 counts of execution and sentenced to death. Johann Meyer, also known as Stumpfarm, represents 1923 because it is the year in which he died. Born in 1886, this serial killer was a German national. His crimes spanned from March 1918 to May of 1919, and the victim count was 5. 3 of these victims were women who he had previously courted, and the other 2 victims were men he was acquainted with. Johann Meyer's disposal site was the woods, and he left each of his victims' broken bodies there after shooting them with a carbine rifle. He would later describe the victims' deaths as being a shot, a scream, all over. In order to avoid his victims being identified, he swapped their heads and limbs with each other, which wasn't very effective. Although he was investigated in July of 1919 by police, it was actually young boys from the Songer district of Uelgum in August of that same year who recognised him and reported him to the police. On February 7, 1923, Meyer was charged with 4 counts of murder and 1 of manslaughter. The manslaughter charge guaranteed Stumpfarm 15 years in prison, but he was sentenced to death by guillotine. On the 29th of December 1923, Meyer was decapitated in penance for his crimes. When Karl Denke, also known as the Forgotten Cannibal, was apprehended in 1924, the community of the area now known as Judsche, Poland, went into shock. Even from his birth in 1860, it said that Denke had extreme behavioural problems despite being a quiet child. This is cemented in the fact that he ran away from home at the age of 12. From 1903 to 1920, Denke murdered and cannibalized many people. There are 30 confirmed victims, but there may be as many as 42 victims or more. The killer was organised in the aftermath of the murders, with a ledger being found on his property which contained several victims' names. While the bones of tens of bodies were found on his property, it is widely believed that he sold the meat that he didn't eat to local butchers and grocery stores to make some quick cash, saying it was wild boar which he had hunted. However, in 1924, Denke's next intended victim would get extremely lucky. After Denke struck the man with a pickaxe, Vincenz Olivier was able to escape him and alert the authorities. After being questioned, Denke was put in a holding cell. He didn't fancy being caught for his crimes, so 2 days after his apprehension, he hanged himself in prison to escape sentencing. Following his suicide, the police searched his apartment and found the following list of bones. You can pause to read. Denke was truly a despicable murderer who had no sympathy for his victims and chose to end his own life too, in order to escape his actions. His victims will never find justice. 1925 was the year in which Martha Wise was caught for the crimes that she had committed. Over the span of a year, 17 members of her family mysteriously fell ill, 3 of which died in her care. The story of her murders are considered to be the most sensationalized of the time in her home state of Ohio. In 1924, the year prior to Martha's crime reveal, her husband died suddenly. There is no indication that Wise killed her husband, as he did not fall ill before his death like her 3 fatal victims. Apparently, following the death of her husband, the woman became obsessed with attending and talking about funerals and often wailed vehemently throughout the service, regardless of there being no relation to the deceased. Perhaps this new obsession with funerals drove the murders in 1924, but I believe her true motivation was revenge. Some time after her husband's death, Martha began dating a farmhand. Needless to say, her family did not approve in the slightest, perhaps because the new relationship showed no devotion to her dead husband. Her mother and aunt constantly asked her to end this new relationship. Eventually, fed up, Martha did. Things seemed to be fine between the 3, however, because Martha invited her entire family to stay with her for Thanksgiving of 1924. That night, the entire family came down with symptoms of a terrible stomach flu. Between December that year and January of the next, 3 of the Denke family died, including the aunt who had scorned Martha. After some investigation, it was found that Martha had been purchasing large quantities of arsenic from the local pharmacy, and an autopsy on her aunt found that there were large amounts of arsenic in her system. She was sentenced to life in prison, but briefly had freedom at the age of 79 as she got out on good behaviour. This didn't last long, as no family or hospice would take her in. Ultimately, Martha went back to prison where she died alone in 1971. Earle Nelson began his killing spree in early 1926. A California native, his crimes didn't just get confined to the Sunshine State. He traversed the US and Canada, leaving bodies like a trail of breadcrumbs behind him. He is often known as the Dark Strangler or the Gorilla Man. His first spree from February to November of 1926 targeted California, Portland, and Seattle. The second leg of his murder marathon extended from December of the same year to April of 1927, with victims meeting their ends in the Midwest and East Coast areas. The final crimes happened in Winnipeg, Canada from May to June of 1927. At least 22 victims have been confirmed, but if they were targeted, it was for whatever money they may have had. Nelson often posed as a possible renter or maintenance worker in order to gain entry to homes where he would often rape women and murder them before robbing them. He is known to also have committed necrophilic acts against the victims' bodies. Each victim was strangled, including an 8-month baby who was the son of one of Nelson's adult victims. The child was the only child or male victim. After the last of Nelson's victims was found by police, they got eyewitness reports of him and sent out his description to every police station in the US. In June of 1927, he was arrested in a small town in North Dakota. 5 months later, his trial was completed and he was sentenced to death by hanging. Despite previous stints in mental hospitals, the psychiatrist who evaluated Nelson found him to be perfectly sane, and so the sentence was carried out. In January of 1928, Earle Nelson took his last strained breath as the gallows strangled him as he had done to so many of his victims. What a fitting method of execution. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of my series. This series will most likely be 20 episodes long, so make sure you subscribe in order to catch each year from 1921 to 2021. As always, there is a charity and a petition in the description which needs your support. You'll also see the link to my Discord server down below if you'd like to come say hi and keep up to date. Stay freaky, stay informed. It may save your life.